People often refer to it typically in terms of price inflation because that's what we experience in our day-to-day life. But when I use the term inflation, I'm specifically referring to the arbitrary expansion of a fiat currency supply within the protections of a legal monopoly.
Real life, true stories, ain't no fairy tale. Everybody in this world's got a story to tell. Living in this life full of stress, recession hits you hard and leave you depressed.
Sure. Yeah, so I think inflation is a very muddied term to begin with. People often refer to it typically in terms of price inflation because that's what we experience in our day-to-day life. But when I use the term inflation, I'm specifically referring to the arbitrary expansion of a fiat currency supply within the protections of a legal monopoly. So what I think is a useful analogy here is if you consider that a stock certificate for a company, right, is a title to a share of that company. So you could say that it's a title to the capital that company represents. So each share certificate is basically a claim on an equity interest in the company. The company is just an assemblage of capital. Money is sort of similar in that it is basically a title to global capital in a way that you can use money to effectively as a call option on any form of capital in the world, right? Money can be used to obtain anything. Another way to think about that, as I've laid out in some of my work, is that because human time is the major, you could say time or energy is the number one or primary input to every economic process that creates anything of value, and money can be used to obtain anything of value. You could effectively say that money is a title to human time or energy as well. So if you have any experience investing or running a private company, you know intuitively and obviously that you would never issue a certain class of stock or shares in that company that could issue new shares to itself and externalize the dilution onto another share class. So you had class A that could print itself new shares but not be diluted, and basically just externalize the dilution to class B, for instance. If that were the situation on a company cap table, class A shareholders would just dilute the class B shareholders to zero, right? They just print themselves new shares until they own the whole company. That's obviously insane. No one would ever sign up to own shares in a company that were class B because you effectively have no ownership interest. Yet that dynamic is exactly how the current legacy financial monetary system works. There is one group of shareholders in the monetary system that can print themselves new shares in the form of expanded fiat currency supply. They can then dole out that issuance at their own political whim, discretion, arbitrariness, and effectively externalize all the cost of that new monetary issuance onto users of the currency. That's inflation in a nutshell. It's, if you consider again, currency as title to capital in the world, if there's one group that can produce new titles to that capital and then externalize the dilution, it's a pretty unfair, unjust, insidious arrangement. So I've referred to this actual phrase became very popular when you say that inflation is legalized counterfeiting, counterfeiting is criminalized inflation. It's the same thing, right? So George Floyd, for instance, I think he was originally attacked by the law for having a counterfeit $20 bill, if I recall correctly. I think that was his original crime. That's a crime, right? Because he's not a licensed counterfeiter. Yet that is the exact same operation that the Federal Reserve perpetrates by the trillion and does it legally in broad daylight. They even hold meetings about it and tell us they're going to do it. And my presumption here is that it's just a generalized ignorance of how money works, that people tolerate this and we discuss it openly, that, oh, what is Jerome Powell going to do next week? Is that good or bad for the economy? Debating as if there were some difference, but in all cases where you're preserving an industry through legal monopoly, under the threat of force, if someone else tries to become a competitor in that space, it's always bad. It's always bad for the market because you now have systemized, uninsurable theft being perpetrated against all market actors. You can't, like, if it was just roadside criminality and someone's, attacking you on the side of the road and taking some of your stuff every now and then, you could actually insure against that. You could have insurance for your business to offset some of those losses, and you could give back the business. But because inflation is systematic and effectively uninsurable before Bitcoin, it dampens the ability for markets to create wealth in the world. So it's like central banking is shackling the economic potential of humanity, in my opinion. And Bitcoin is very important in that respect, in that it liberates us.